Hello, good afternoon. 大家好，下午好。好。Quick introduction of myself. My name is Ricky. I actually grew up in Vancouver. I went to high school in Eric Hamber and then UBC. So it's good to come home. But then I spent the past 13 years in Asia, first with McKinsey and then 9 years with Microsoft. We bought the cloud, Azure, Microsoft Azure, to China. So, and now I'm actually focused on the strategic partnership between Microsoft and some of the top internet company in China. So today, my topic is talk about, cloud computing, my favorite topic, and how it supports the e-commerce. I remember back then, when I first graduated from UBC, actually joined a startup in Vancouver. And that's the time that we actually built a website. I remember at that time, all we need is one server, and it's actually hosting about 30 or so websites together. And now, today, like this morning, I think you have all heard, the enormous, transaction volumes. I don't think one server is going to cut it this day. So we're going to turn to like cloud computing. Okay. So why cloud computing to begin with, right? So we have this explosion of device. In any estimate, by year 2020, we're going to have about 50 billion devices. Now, consider the worldwide population of 7 billion. That is, probably 6 or 7 at least per device. I mean, I'm guilty for that. I have at least about 10 devices myself. So what does that mean, right? With all those devices, how do you keep a consistent user experience? Now, with all those data, that's all what we call put it in the cloud. And this is why cloud computing is so important, because it kind of keep your data and your preference and your experience, your transaction and everything is in the cloud. And he also estimated by the end of 2013, 90% of your device will be connected device, right? So now today we talk about at home, we have broadband, and then when you go out, you have Wi-Fi everywhere. You have your 4G. Soon you're going to have 5G coming up. So pretty much everything that you carry down to a watch will be connected, and all those data will be synced to the cloud. Now, what kind of data are we talking about? We're talking about 300 plus petabyte on our Bing server alone. Now, petabyte, what is a petabyte, right? That's 15 zero. The entire US library, if you compress it, is 2 petabytes. So that's give you kind of the data volume that we are talking about, right? And then email. I think everybody have an email. So there's just on Outlook.com, previously Hotmail, we have over 400 million active email users on that alone, right? SkyDrive, where you put your photos and your data and stuff, 250 million, right? Skype, we no longer just we talk every day on using Skype. That's 2 billion minutes per day, right? So all that, all those big data, all the computing, all those connected devices, that's why we need like cloud computing, right? But what does that mean for cloud computing when it related to e-commerce, right? Cloud computing is actually evolution, right? To think about before, if you have to run a website, you have to set up your own server, you have to buy your own hardware, and then you have to do it yourself. You have to hire a system engineer and everything, even for a very small operation. But today, cloud computing is literally bringing all those complexity into a commodity. And then all you need to do is go up and turn up the meter, and you can buy. So the best thing that it happened is the economic of scale, because you do not need to be like as big as Amazon or Microsoft in order to have access to 10,000 server. With a flip of a switch online, you can access to that, right? So what does that give you? Flexibility, right? If you can bring in the customer, just like if you partner with Richway, partner with Baidu, boom, you get instant access to 1.5 billion consumer, right? And in a day, I will get to that later in terms of the enormous volume of the transaction that we are talking about. But those are the things that, with cloud computing, that will enable those new, deployment, right? Now, you can always say, well, data is very private. I want to run my own server. Yes, you can. You can build your own private cloud. But then you look at the kind of the cost delta, right? The total cost of ownership. The yellow line on top is the one that you will do it yourself, running a private cloud operation. And then the red line, if you do it on a public cloud. So you can see across the board, right? It doesn't really matter when you're a GE, where you can run like 100,000 server yourself. It's always cost benefit to put it on a public cloud, right? Now, of course, you can have all the question about data security and all that, but there's a solution for that. But net, if you look at the bottom line, nothing beats the public cloud in terms of the cost, right? Especially, and that's especially true when you're a smaller company. When you look at on the left-hand side, like if you have like 100 server or less, then the cost would be enormous difference between running your own cloud versus a public cloud infrastructure, right? Right. So for SMB, it can get up to 25 times the economic value, right? Okay, now, we all talk about, like in this morning on just now, we hear all about the different e-commerce and how they fluctuated over time. And then you can see also that's another value of cloud computing. How do we enable all the different computing patterns? So, I mean, sometimes, if you are working for a government agency or a bank, they only open 8 hours. For the rest of the day, they shut it down, right? But that is a waste of computing resource, we call them, right? For a cloud computing, why they can keep the cost so low is the fact they can utilize all the computing power 24 hours around. So in the case that every single computing resource is being utilized, and that's what brings down the total cost of ownership. And it also would be good if you are running an e-commerce. So most likely you have what we call the unpredictable burst. So at that moment, when you announce for a promotion, let's say 50% off everything, and then instance, all of a sudden your incoming transaction could go from 100,000 transactions per minute. So how do you deal with that, right? If you're still running your own server, that is a nightmare to overcome. And this is also the flexibility, when it comes to cloud computing, because it has auto scaling. It just like based on your transaction volume and why not, you can scale out your infrastructure, right? Yeah. So the other things that we are talking about is like how safe. Like today's e-commerce is really like the minute your server is down, your entire business is out of like shutting down. That's what I mean. So your data is highly, highly critical. We have heard instance where a very successful startup, just because they did not implement the right backup and disaster recovery skill, boom, in a matter of a minute, he lose all the customer information. And basically for the e-commerce, that is your bloodline. If you lose your customer information, the minute you lose that, your business is out of the door, right? So for the extra protection, this is what the public cloud is give you. It really built in for every single instance, what we call the single point of failure, right? We try to mitigate that. So give you one instance, right? And now on a hard disk, if you store one copy of your data, we actually store it in 3 different physical locations in our physical rack. So that means the lightning has to strike 3 times before your data is gone, right? Now, if you are still not sure, then you can actually take what we call the dual geo redundancy, where you have like your data stored in 2 different data centers, about 500 miles apart. And in that instance, you have 6 physical copies of your data spread out in 2 different data centers, 500 miles apart. So we've been running for this for close to 7 years now. we have never had an instance where the customer would lose data because of hardware failure, right? So those are the kind of the technical complexity that is built in to make this such, foolproof and bulletproof, operation, so to speak, right? Now, so, I've been throwing a lot of technical jargon. So what does that has to do with, our cross-border e-commerce, right? Now, for, all the operation, if you're on the internet, it has 3 stages, From a development point of view, you want to make sure that it's transparent and the technology is scalable. From an operation point of view, you want to be reliable and secure. And then at the end of the day, when you run your bottom line, you want to make sure that you have the lowest total cost of ownership. And this is exactly what the cloud computing is going to bring to you, right? Now, we first look at kind of the business challenge of running an e-commerce, right? So one of the biggest issue is unbalanced and unpredictable bursts. So in the US, we have the Black Friday, right? So the Black Friday, you'll probably run about 20% of your entire transaction for the year in a single day, right? In China, we have the single day. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. And the other part is hyper-growth. If you run a very successful e-commerce company, you can go from a 1,000 customer company next month to 100,000. So how do you cope with that growth, right? And then the other one is reliability, I just talked about. And lastly is global deployment. So what we're talking about is, okay, well, even you're a small shop, I want to be able to run my site in Canada, in the US, now to China, and soon we're going to go to Vietnam, Indonesia. So how do we deal with all those country currency and those issues, right? All right, so now, let me get back to the earlier point about the single day event, right? This is really created in China, made in China, a shopping day, right? In that one single day, Tmall, which is the biggest e-commerce site, that single day it breaks 9 Guinness World Record, right? 91 billion in sales revenue, 3.1 million mobile phones sold in that one day, 10 million liters of milk. I have no idea why so many people drink milk in that day, but somehow that's 6.6 tons of nuts. Okay, well, there you go. So that's give you the scale of the market that we are talking about. Now, think about every single one of those transactions need to be processed, need to be supported, shipped out. So think about all those complexity in terms of technology, the operation, that has to involve to make it happen, right? Now, the other thing I think you probably read this from all the other candidates in the show is the hyper growth, right? So we're talking about this cross-border e-commerce going to exceed 1 trillion annual growth, 30% year over year, right? We are talking about Shanghai, because of this free trade zone that they established, 10x of the increase, right? Guangdong, they expect to double quarter by quarter in terms of the e-commerce revenue. So again, this is like unprecedented growth in that, right? So, right, how do you, this why do I want to do this on cloud computing? The simple matter is it saves you money, right? In a traditional sense, as I kind of talk about, you got a fluctuation of the transaction volume. I mean, e-commerce, probably the busiest hour is from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night, right? And those two times, you probably, let's say, require about 1,000 servers. But for the rest of the day, you probably need only about 20 servers, right? But if you're running your own data center or your own server, you're paying for that 1,000 server for the entire 24 hours. But if you go with cloud computing, with the hourly billing, you're really literally just paying for what you're consuming. So just like tap water, the minute you turn it on, you're paying for it. The minute that you don't need it, you shut it off, and you don't have to pay a penny of it, right? So on average, we calculated just by taking advantage of that, you save about 50% of the cost on that. Global deployment. right? So Azure, this is do a bit of advertising for Microsoft. We have probably the widest coverage in terms of geographic location. I think we're up to about 22 regions now worldwide. So what does that mean? So basically you don't have to be worried about all this like global expansion. When you're ready in that market, you just again turn on a switch. That server will be ready for you in your region. And we also support the local currency for that as well. So one example is PPTV, a Chinese internet media company. They achieved a global expansion in less than 3 months. And that's unheard of before. I mean, you go to one country, it will probably take you 3 months before, right? Okay, I see the sign up. That's perfect for my summary. So if I kind of recap kind of the challenge that's faced by e-commerce, so unbalanced and unpredictable computing need, high reliability, and worldwide deployment. So in terms of cloud, this is what we are giving you in terms of advantage. Hyperscaling, hourly billing rate, 99.99 SLA, right? And then 25 data center worldwide support. So with that, the bottom line is it will save you not only the upfront investment, but also your ongoing operation costs. And then at the end, it gives you a much better ROI. Okay, with that, thank you.